Now, the Hellcat's not new, the Charger is certainly not new. This model dates back almost 15 years. But for 2020, they've finally given us better handling in the Hellcat, something that it has, I think, needed for a while. And that's part of the new wide body package that you can see right here with these big Fender Flares. This is now standard on the Hellcat version of the Charger and optional on the slightly more sane 485 horsepower Scat Pack model. For 2020, there have been some slight tweaks to the overall styling. So we have a slightly different front end look there, but this is still instantly recognizable as a Charger. And the Hellcat still has extra vents on the hood, one up there up front and then one on each side to help release the heat from the hood. All the vents that we see on this vehicle are functional, unlike some other cars out on the market. Now, clearly we need to talk about performance up front because that's what this is all about. This is an absolutely insane family car. This is theoretically in the same segment as the Toyota Avalon. The Avalon goes 0 to 60 in about 7.5 seconds, just like your average family car. This will go 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds. And straight from the factory, it will do a quarter mile in the 3-season tire package in 10.9 seconds at 131 miles an hour. If you want to go faster 0 to 60 than this in a sedan, you have incredibly few options in America. And if you want to go faster than this in practically anything, including a Porsche 911, you're going to be paying tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars more than this. The performance in this vehicle is so impressive that when we take a look at something like a Tesla Model S P100D, obviously insanely fast 0 to 60, 2.3 seconds, by the time we take a look at the quarter mile, this vehicle's going 6 miles an hour faster. And by the time we go all the way on up to maximum speed for that Tesla Model S, this is going to get you there faster than that Tesla Model S. And this will continue going all the way on up to 196 miles an hour, making this the fastest production sedan currently available in the United States. Now, admittedly, that's because some of the high horsepower BMW and Mercedes models are electronically limited to 155, and this is aerodynamically limited. This is also, interestingly enough, a little bit slower than the 2019 model because of the wide body aerodynamics. These have cut that top speed down from 204 miles an hour to 196. But as insane as the performance numbers are for the Hellcat Charger, this is still a 4-door large family sedan. So we've got big doors back here, and this is over 200 inches long. So this is solidly in the category of a large American sedan, significantly larger than something like a BMW M3. And I suppose you could compare this to something like a BMW M3 or certain Mercedes-AMG models, even though this is considerably larger because they're in about the same sort of price range. But the character of this is much, much different. This is a much bigger vehicle. The wide body change for 2020 is pretty important because previous generations of the Charger, they didn't change the sheet metal of the vehicle at all. And that meant that they couldn't put much wider tires up front than you get in the regular versions of the Charger. But this is pretty different because we now get 305 width tires, not just in the back, but right here up front as well. And that's all courtesy of these large Fender Flares. These are standard on the Charger Hellcat for 2020, optional again, as I said before, on the 395 Scat Pack. Going in for a closer look at these wheels, you can see that we have this aggressively scalloped design. I really find that a very attractive look. Absolutely massive 6-piston Brembo calipers, and you can see those 2-piece rotors behind. The new wider tires and those massive brakes help give this an incredible stopping distance of just 107 feet. Keep in mind, again, this is an over 4,000 pound, over 200 inch long family sedan that really has the performance numbers of some ultra high performance vehicles out there. But from the back end, it doesn't look that much different than the regular Charger, and I think that's something that I like. This definitely has that classic sleeper quality to it. Now, obviously, we do have this big spoiler right here on top of the trunk lid, but you could remove that if you wanted more of a sleeper look. And down here at the bottom, we have relatively demure dual exhausts. These are larger than the rest of the Charger lineup, but they're not absolutely massive like we find in some dedicated performance vehicles. And then we have the somewhat discreet Hellcat badge right there on the right. The Charger isn't just the only entry in this segment that has a V8 engine under the hood. We have 3 different V8 engines under this hood, but we're here to talk about the top-end one, this 6.2-liter supercharged V8. This produces a whopping 707 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. This engine sends all of its power to the rear wheels only via a standard 8-speed ZF automatic transmission. If you act fast, there will be a limited number of Chargers that will bump this up to 707 horsepower in the new Daytona trim. Apparently that trim was designed because of certain qualifications for some national racing series. FCA had to build at least 500 of them in order to qualify as a stock car, and that's why you can get that 717 horsepower model. But any way you slice it, this is going to be one of the most powerful sedans available in the world. Definitely one of the fastest as well. Now, while we're under the hood, we should talk about the way that an engine like this delivers power, because it's very different than those absolutely blistering numbers that we see in the Tesla Model S. The Tesla Model S, with its dual motor design and the massive amount of low-end torque that electric motors can deliver, has an absolutely insane 0 to 30 time, considerably faster than this vehicle right here, because the engine hasn't started producing its maximum amount of power. And of course, we have a traction issue because this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, so there's certainly a lot of wheel slip going on at those initial acceleration times. But when we're talking about going from 60 miles an hour to 120, 160, 190 miles an hour, engines like this are going to deliver a faster experience than electric motors, because most electric vehicles out there don't have gear ratios to choose from, and those motors tend to run out of steam at higher RPMs. So that's why when you take a look at the 0 to 60 times in this model, it's notably slower than that Tesla P100D. But by the time we take a look at the quarter mile, this has caught up considerably and is actually going faster in terms of miles per hour. At 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds, I find these seats very comfortable, but if you're a little bit larger than I am, then you should know that these side bolsters are not adjustable. The seat bottom bolsters are not terribly aggressive, but the side bolsters are. We do have 4-way adjustable lumbar support, a power adjustable driver's seat, and a 2-position seat memory over there on the driver's side. We also have a powered tilt telescopic steering column, which is something that we don't generally find in the mainstream category. Overall, I found these seats very comfortable, but there are a few seats in this segment that are a little bit more adjustable. It's worth noting that unlike some of the Japanese competition that you might want to compare the lower end models to, the passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Hopping into the back seats, you'll find rear seat legroom is pretty generous. With the front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I still have about 4 or 5 inches of legroom left, and I was sitting in a little bit more reclined and a little bit more rearward position than I find myself sitting in other vehicles. The front seats are pretty wide, and that does impact overall combined legroom. The other thing worth noting is that this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, so it's not going to be as space efficient as some of the front-wheel drive competition. So if you're really after a lot of rear seat legroom, then you may want to look at some of the front-wheel drive competition. But this is still definitely generous as far as the large sedans in this category go. However, if I move over to the right side of the vehicle, you'll notice that headroom is a little bit more limited than in some of the competition. My head is touching the ceiling, and it's this glass portion of the ceiling, not the fabric portion right here. Logically, because this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, we have a drive shaft that runs from the front to the back, and that does mean we get a little bit less legroom for the center passenger, but we still have a 60/40 folding seat back. These don't fold flat with the trunk area, however. It's clear that Dodge was prioritizing cargo room and room for those big engines a little bit over rear seat accommodations, and I'm fine with that particular trade-off. Back here we have a very large and very accommodating trunk. It's also a little bit squarer than some of the newer competitors, and if you wanted to put some of those more awkward items back here like golf clubs, the trunk really goes pretty far into the corners right there, right by the taillights. Talking about the elephant in the room, I think it's a little bit too easy to dismiss the Charger as some sort of dinosaur that you can buy in America, because FCA has done a lot of work to try and keep the Charger relevant. And I'm not just talking about the high horsepower engines under the hood, I'm talking about the overall suspension dynamics, the way the vehicle feels out on the road, and to some extent the interior. Although admittedly, as we're going to take a look at in a bit here, I think the interior is due for a refresh. Front seat occupants get height adjustable shoulder belts and 2-way adjustable headrests. From this angle, you can see how aggressively bolstered the front seats really are. We have these large bolsters right there around the shoulder area, very aggressive side bolsters. Again, these are pretty comfortable for my body shape. And then SRT embossed right there in the center of that seat back. The middle sections of the leather upholstery on the seat bottom and seat back cushion are perforated because these seats are both heated and ventilated. When it comes to the rest of the interior, we don't see too many changes for 2020. We do have some new stitching right there on the upper injection molded sections of the door, but the rest of the door panels are basically the same as before. This particular interior is this two-tone black and red interior, which I do find attractive. We have comfortable armrests right over there on the passenger side and large practical bottle holders down there at the bottom of the door. But as we move on over to the dashboard, you'll definitely notice that the interior doesn't feel quite as modern as some of the other FCA vehicles on sale, especially some of the newer Ram products that have those really gorgeous dashboards. We have the SRT logo right there on the injection molded portion of the dashboard, a large and practical glove compartment below that. This is a combination bin and slot style glove compartment. And if we move back over to the main portion of the dashboard, you can see that we now have some after stitching in this injection molded upper section of the dashboard, but the overall design remains about the same. So we still have this trim panel. This is sort of a carbon fiber effect trim panel going on right here, and it bridges the instrument cluster on over to the infotainment system. In the middle of the dashboard, we have the same 8.4-inch touchscreen infotainment system that we saw before. This is running one of the latest versions of the Uconnect infotainment software, and that means that this is one of the easier to use and one of my more favorite infotainment systems in the large sedan segment right now. As you can see, the system features smartphone integration, and that integration does not take up the whole screen, so it leaves these bottom options still available to the driver even when you're in that CarPlay or the Android Auto interface. From that SRT screen, you can also very easily activate launch control right there. We can go back and see our performance pages. This is an additional app that loads in the system, giving us additional gauge readouts like oil temperature, air-fuel ratio, etc. We have timers right there. We can pull up the engine graphic, giving us information about what the engine is doing, an internal dyno right there. I do like the additional gauges screen. I wish this was something that we saw in all FCA vehicles out there. I do find that a particularly handy screen. As we see in other SRT vehicles, launch control is very easy to access via this physical button right here below the infotainment screen. I really love that touch because you don't have to dance around in circles or dig through menus in order to find launch control like you do find in some luxury or performance vehicles. The SRT button takes you to that home screen that I showed you before. We then have physical controls for the infotainment and the climate control that are duplicated in that software. Continuing below that, we have a large storage area right there, 12-volt power port, a very traditional shifter, basically the same that we see in the rest of the lineup. Drive is down there, manual mode is over to the left. As we've seen in other SRT vehicles, we have color-coded keys, so the red key gives you maximum performance, and you have a black key that you can give folks that you don't want to have access to the full 700 horsepower. And even with the red key, if you want to limit things to 500 horsepower, you can always do that within the infotainment system. So if you're on a slippery surface or you just don't want to have access to all of that punch for whatever reason, you can limit yourself to just 500. Continuing back down the center console, we have two large cup holders right there, a padded center armrest, and this does open to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment. This is also where we find the two USB inputs and auxiliary input for the Uconnect infotainment system. The instrument cluster is still a partial LCD design. This gives us things like our trip computer readouts, fuel economy, etc. But I think these additional gauges are really where this display shines because we can get a lot of different readouts here that you don't find in even other performance vehicles out there. Intake temperature, engine power, engine torque, boost pressure, coolant temperature, oil pressure, all that sort of stuff there. We also have access to a larger digital speedometer, vehicle diagnostics. You can enter speed warning options there, read vehicle messages, see audio readouts, and there's even a little fuel economy screen where you can see your fuel economy average, which is going to be pretty low in a 700 horsepower car. Moving out from there, we have one of my favorite steering wheels available in America. This is very thickly rimmed, however, so if you do prefer a narrower steering wheel, this may not be good for you. Perforated leather sections on each side. We have a flat bottom right down there, paddle shifters on the back, and then you'll find the volume up, down, and track forward and backward buttons on the back of the steering wheel as well. That leaves the front of the wheel for controlling that multifunction LCD instrument cluster over there, controls for the phone interface right over here on the left. Optionally, if you get the radar adaptive cruise control, you'd find buttons down there on that side of the steering wheel and the regular cruise control buttons up top. If I were to offer a critique of this particular steering wheel, the one thing that I would change would be this airbag cover because I really like the way that this feels on the rim, but the airbag cover is a little bit discordant with the leather that's going on the outside. Obviously, the first thing you'll notice about the Hellcat, regardless of what year you're talking about, is the absolutely insane amount of power we get out of this supercharged engine. And because this is a supercharged engine, not a turbocharged engine, we have a massive amount of low-end torque right off idle. That's the big difference between this and, say, something like a BMW M5 or a Mercedes-Benz AMG. Now, the big difference between this and something like those luxury high-performance vehicles is going to be that this is rear-wheel drive only. We don't have an all-wheel drive system. Now, I'm a little bit surprised that FCA hasn't figured out some way to put the Grand Cherokee's all-wheel drive system in here because the all-wheel drive Grand Cherokee Trackhawk has this same engine. The all-wheel drive traction is the reason that when you take a look at the Grand Cherokee's performance figures, 0 to 60 really isn't that far off this vehicle. Traction is also the reason that we get the wide body package for 2020, because we get those wider tires, which really helps this vehicle apply the power to the ground. 0 to 60 times in this Charger are still different, however, than something like a Tesla P100D. Now, I realize it sounds funny to talk about something like a Charger in the same sentence as a luxury electric vehicle like a Tesla Model S, but both of these vehicles put down absolutely insane numbers. The Model S really excels when it comes to the 0 to 30 and 0 to 60 time. Right off the line, that all-wheel drive electric feel really snaps you back in the seat. And although this is unquestionably fast, we don't get that same feeling here.
back all the way to the left. There you go. Give me some gas. Go into the gas. Letting it blend out. There you go. Stay on the gas all the way through here.
Clearly, a vehicle like this is designed with track driving in mind, drag strip driving in mind, or if you happen to live in Germany, Autobahn driving, because this does have an absolutely insane top speed of just under 200 miles an hour. If, on the other hand, you live in the United States, then unfortunately drag strips and racetracks are the only places you're going to be able to really exercise this engine. For some reason, a lot of folks that I talk to out there think that vehicles like the Charger are losing their relevance. But when you take a look at the sales numbers, it couldn't be further from the truth, because the Charger is not only the best-selling entry in the large sedan segment in America right now, this outsells vehicles like the Avalon and the Cadenza by an incredible number. FCA has been moving between 80 and 90,000 of these a year for the last 10-15 years. Sales of the Charger are very, very stable, simply because this is the only true American muscle sedan left in America. We have an affordable price tag, relatively speaking. We have very powerful engines under the hood and a rear-wheel drive platform. The rear-wheel drive platform really dates back to about 2006. In 2011, the vehicle got a redesign, but it wasn't a complete clean sheet redesign. In 2015, we had a facelift, and now in 2020, we have another tweak, and we add the wide body to the Hellcat. For 2020, the Hellcat starts at $71,140 after destination. So this is significantly less expensive than something like a Mercedes-Benz E63 AMG or a BMW M5, vehicles that aren't going to have the level of performance or the same kind of character that we see in the Charger. Now, obviously, they're going to have more luxury features, more luxury touches on the inside. The interiors are definitely more refined, and the driving nature of those vehicles definitely feels more solid, more European, and this has, again, a more muscle car vibe. But this is an incredible performance deal, and that's one of the reasons that the Charger is selling so well for 2019. For some reason, the common wisdom seems to be that the reason the Charger is still selling well in America is because of the base model with the 3.6-liter engine. But according to Dodge, that's not the case. Dodge sells more of the V8 models than they sell that 3.6-liter model. And it's not hard to see why, because if you want to get this kind of interior room and this kind of performance, you're going to have to spend an awful lot more than the Charger Hellcat. For some reason, comparisons between this sedan and something like a Tesla Model S P100D seem almost inevitable. Obviously, the two vehicles could not be more different if they tried. The Tesla is an all-wheel drive electric vehicle with absolutely earth-shattering 0 to 60 times. This is a rear-wheel drive only gasoline muscle car with absolutely earth-shattering 0 to 190 mile an hour times. But this is also not a luxury segment vehicle like the Tesla Model S is, so the interior is not in the same league as the Model S. It's going to be less expensive than that Model S that will give you those fast 0 to 60 times as well. And this is definitely more of a track-focused vehicle, even though this is still a large, heavy American sedan. We have those wide 305 with tires up front and in the back, available summer tires. We have massive amounts of cooling up front, incredibly big brakes, and this is the kind of vehicle that you could take out on a track and just drive lap after lap after lap for 300, 400 miles if you wanted to, without charging, without too much of a problem. The Tesla Model S, on the other hand, is a little bit different, because in order to get that fast 0 to 60 time, you have to engage ludicrous mode, you have to wait till the battery is conditioned if it hasn't already conditioned itself so far, and then you have limited number of those 0 to 60 runs that are that quick before you have to stop and let the battery pack cool down. Things are definitely different here in the Hellcat, although there are still some cooling issues. If you're drag stripping this absolutely back to back to back, this is going to give you that repeatable level of performance that we don't see available currently in the average electric car, or even in those top-end electric cars like the Porsche Taycan, or of course the Tesla Model S. But will those go faster 0 to 30 or 0 to 60? Absolutely, positively, yes. They will be faster in those metrics than this model right here, but they're going to cost you significantly more, and I would argue they're not going to be quite as much fun as this either. If my own money were on the line, I have to say that I don't think I would buy the Hellcat version of the Charger. I think for me, this is just a little bit too much power, just a little bit too crazy. However, I love the fact that this exists, because this 707 horsepower Charger all of a sudden makes the 485 horsepower Charger seem like a very rational decision. And normally a vehicle that produces nearly 500 horsepower would seem an absolutely irrational, absolutely crazy decision to make. But you can justify it to your old maiden aunt or your grandmother by saying, well, I was logical. I didn't choose the 707 horsepower car because I'm a responsible parent and I wanted to put my kid in the less powerful vehicle, and 485 horsepower seemed perfectly rational at the time. I think that's really what the SRT Hellcat does best in the lineup, is it helps justify that seemingly more rational but still truly absolutely insane SRT model, or in this case, the Scat Pack model. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. If your money were on the line, would you look at something like this, or would you spend significantly less and get that 485 horsepower model? For 2020, it's also available with the same wide body package that we find on this. It could be a hair more nimble because it is going to be a little bit lighter, and the overall weight balance is going to be a little bit more advantageous than this top-end Hellcat trim. But let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. If you haven't already done so, find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos. Hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. And of course, you can also join this channel if you want to get early access to news, reviews, and full videos like this one. In the meantime, be sure and check out the video where we focus on the Charger with the 6.4-liter V8 engine, and I'll see you next week.